Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Terry Cole Show. I have a super special guest on today, and I'm so excited for you to dive into the interview that I did with my pal Andrea Owen. Now, Andrea, this is her third book that she's written, but the book is called Make Some Noise, Speak Your Mind, and Own Your Strength. It's super aligned with the work that I do, but she has her own really sassy flavor to all of it, and it's very much a book that also has a workbook element to it. So I hope that you enjoy this interview with female empowerment expert Andrea Owen as much as I enjoyed interviewing my pal. Wow, Andrea Owen, I'm so excited to welcome you back to the Terry Cole Show. You are a repeat guest.
I'm honored. Always a treat to talk to you, Terry. I'll come out and talk to you about anything,
Uh,
groceries,
all the things.
all the things.
What we get to talk about today, though, is super exciting, which is you just dropped a brand new book called Make Some Noise, Speak Your Mind, and Own Your Strength,
Correct.
which, oh my God, you know how much I love talking true. So I'm so pumped about this book. And I want to let's just start with, because you have other books. I talked about this at the
Mhm.
top, but why this book and why now? Like, what made you write this book?
Yeah, well, it goes back all the way to about 2015. And I hadn't even written my second book at that point. But I think I, like many people, was having my own sort of awakening and in just with social issues and things like that, and what that had to do with personal development. I'm in the women's empowerment space. And I got this like tap on the shoulder around needing to talk about, well, I'm obsessed with getting to the root of the problem. Let's just start there. Like, I want, like, okay, the fastest way to fix this. I have a value around efficiency, apparently, which brought me to shame work, because I would have never thought I would be talking about shame. And then what I realized is a lot of the problems that the women were coming to me with, things like boundaries that you talk about a lot, people pleasing, perfectionism, it stems from our conditioning and socialization that we all receive to some extent, depending on who our parents were and caregivers. And that's where a lot of the problem comes from. And so I felt like I can't, and I'm not, a feminist theorist or, a radical feminist or anything like that, but I can't not talk about this, because I felt like they're not mutually exclusive. They're inextricably connected.
Indeed, they are. And so much of this is also your own life, I imagine, or can I ask, is it that you got to a certain place in your own life where this was happening for you?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even identify as a feminist until I was in my early 30s and I was in a women's studies class, which I think is sort of the opening point for many people. But I had to take the class to satisfy a requirement to finish my bachelor's degree, and it didn't really identify as a feminist because I didn't know what one was. I grew up thinking that it was these, women who didn't want to shave their legs and thought being a stay-at-home mother was terrible and hated men, which is not what that is. But I didn't know because I
Obviously.
never questioned what I was taught.
Sure.
And so I started to realize through this class and then doing more research that, oh, this thing that I've been angry at my entire life, that lives in my belly, this rage more or less that I had, it had a name. And that was sort of kind of the genesis of this book, really, but more so personally, my own process through it.
Amazing. Why do you think it's so hard for humans who are raised as women
Mhm.
to make some noise and speak our minds?
Well, I mean, punishment versus reward. We are essentially rewarded for being, kind of fitting into the box of conformity that is laid out for us, like what it means to be a quote unquote good woman. And I'm speaking generally here. Of course, there's nuances and exceptions. But generally speaking, we are taught to be accommodating. Like, that's the biggest one. Like, be accommodating, make everyone as comfortable as possible at the expense of your own comfort and priorities and values. We should be quiet. Don't make a scene. Don't cause any kind of ruckus. And I don't think I was ever explicitly taught that, but it was definitely cultural and for sure messaging and the narrative of, be a girl's girl, be just polite and nice and selfless.
Yep.
And that's why it's so hard, because we're rewarded if we do that. And many times we are punished. I mean, look at, like, I grew up, and Madonna was huge in the 80s when I was a little girl, and she was crucified for for
Yep.
being expressive, for embracing her sexuality and being sensual. Like,
Yep.
that's what I saw growing up. Like, I both admired her and feared her for, I definitely knew, like, it's okay because she's a celebrity. Almost felt like an anomaly, but like, never ever do what she does or you will be punished for it. That's
Right.
one of the reasons it's so hard.
Indeed. Okay. So at the end of each chapter, you have what you're calling the unlearning.
Mhm.
So tell us about, like, you're walking readers through these 4 steps. So let's talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit.
Well, it's kind of like the TLDR, too long didn't read, of each chapter, if anybody wants to cheat. But no, it's more so, I like self-help books that have sort of a process that you're taken through, and sort of, it makes it easier to conceptualize things. So it's 4 steps. The first one is to notice. You have to name it to tame it. It's just about the self-awareness of it. And then the second one is not far from, it should be like, step 1.5 instead of step 2, is to get curious. So I want people to watch out if they are judging what they're noticing about themselves, especially when it comes to things like internalized misogyny. We can beat ourselves up for it. Just get curious. Why do you think that you have these judgments? Why do you think that you thought this way? Where do you think it came from? What do you think you can do about it? So it is just about getting curious. The third step is self-compassion, because again, no one beats themselves up into betterment. No one, talks mad, negative
Right.
self-talk in order to feel better. And then the fourth one is keep the momentum. And so that's many ways about having conversations with people you trust about it, whether it's your therapist, whether it's your most trusted women friends in your life, whether it's your partner. So it's about, it's never linear. We know that, but it's about not just, I don't want people to just like read the book and then put it away and say like, that's nice.
Yep.
I want them to somehow keep the momentum.
I love the process, though, because from a psychotherapeutic point of view, of course, obviously the way you've outlined it is the way that we learn best. And there's my crew really wants to get into action. Like, they're like you. They really want to be efficient and get it done.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'm always, when I'm teaching, like, slow down, because awareness, we cannot change anything we're not aware of. And so there's something so great that each chapter has this, where you're walking us through this process of, really, it's the beginning of integrating these changes. Be curious, but then keep it moving,
Right.
which I think is so important, because the truth in writing it that way, the truth about transformation is that it's all these small steps. It's
Mm-hmm.
consistency. Yes, and sometimes we have peak experiences and peak aha moments and revelations, and great. Most of life and most of transformation is not that, though. It's exactly what you're
Right.
saying. It's baby steps.
Mm-hmm.
Just keep going. Look, be curious, ask questions, and see. I love, love, love that so much. Okay. So before I get into other questions here, I want to ask you, who is this book for?
Oh, it's for, I mean, I wrote it in some ways as a love letter to my daughter. She's 11. And
Mm-hmm,
sometimes, as many people I think naturally do, think catastrophic thoughts.
mm-hmm.
I thought, if I died, what do I want her to know? What
Right.
are the most important lessons I want her to carry with her as someone who identifies as a woman walking through this world, and especially in the US culture? So it's a love letter to her, and it's for my mother and her mother and her mother and her mother. It blows my mind that there's this female lineage that goes all the way back to, quote unquote, Eve. And, these mothers may not agree with everything I have to say, but I think about what they have endured to get me here. And I want to give
Right.
this gift to them. And of course, I always write all my books for my readers and my listeners of my show. And they, I wouldn't be here without them and their interest in this work. So that's who it's
Right.
for. It's for a lot of
Love
people.
it. I kind of want to hear about the drug deal.
Oh my gosh.
Can you tell that story?
Yes. Oh my God. It's paid. It's interesting. So as we're recording this, I just recorded the audiobook version last week at the studio. And I didn't realize how many personal gut-wrenching stories I told in this book because, it's this book is more personal than my other previous two books. It was incredibly therapeutic to, it's one thing to like write your stuff in silence in your head and then give it to people to read quietly. But when you actually read the stories out loud, anyway. So I was in, just very quick context. I was married before. I'm married now to a much better man, but I was married before when I was younger, and it was an extremely dysfunctional relationship. I didn't know how dysfunctional at the time until I had some space. But we divorced. He had an affair with our neighbor and got her pregnant. It was very traumatic and dramatic.
Mm.
And as soon as he and I split, he and I had been together for a very long time. I started dating someone whom I thought was Mr. Right. I met him online, and he was tall and handsome and checked off all of the boxes. And on our first date, Terri, my intuition told me, this seems too good to be true. Like something's up,
Mm.
but I was in such a vulnerable and desperate and traumatized place. I was not seeing it. I mean, I could have been hit over the head with these red flags and I would have just pretended like they weren't there. So I continued to date him, and he had terminal cancer. He told me on the second or third date, and he even gave me an out and said, do you want to, not be in this relationship? And being the codependent I was,
Right. You're like, oh my God, you need me?
you
Excellent.
must have come down from heaven for me to take care of. Yes,
Seriously.
I'm going to stay in this relationship, even though I have no business in it. So the months went on, and he would get really sick, and then he would get better. At one point he told me he was terminal, and I had isolated myself from all my friends, like classic love addict behavior. I
Mhm.
was exhibiting. I'm the anxious attachment style. And I started to get suspicious. Again, my intuition was telling me that I definitely think something is up. So we were going down to Mexico, to Tijuana, Mexico, most weekends because we lived in San Diego at the time. It was a quick trip. And there are legitimate pharmacies there that you can get medications in Tijuana, Mexico that you cannot get in the United States.
Right.
And he was going down there to get his cancer medication because it was not FDA approved or some yada, yada story, which I
Right.
believed. But I was starting to get suspicious as the months went on. And there was one day in particular, he was very sick. And then it was like 10 o'clock at night. And he's like, we need to go down to Mexico to get my cancer medication. And I was like, the pharmacies are closed. Like, can it wait until tomorrow? So we end up down there, and we're walking down this back alley. And I'm like, what are we doing here? And there was these two men standing behind a building, and my boyfriend goes, stay here. And he walks over to talk to them. And I could hear him talking to them, even though they were talking in low voices. And he says to these two strangers, he says, do you know where I can get some OxyContin? And it was one of those moments where I had a feeling, but I didn't want to believe it. And I thought, oh shit, my boyfriend is a
Right.
drug addict.
Right.
And here I am in this foreign country that's often dangerous
Mhm.
at night. And the men point down the street, and we go over to this cab, and he opens the back door of the cab for me to get inside. And everything in my body was screaming, don't get in the cab, go back over the border, go home and
Yeah.
break up with him. And I said, I don't want to get in the car. And he took my face in his hands and, lifted my chin to look at him. And he said, I would never do anything to put your safety in jeopardy. And I got in the car, and
Mm.
we drove to this person's house, and I gave him money because I was supporting his drug addiction because he had quit his job because he was too sick to work. And the whole point of that story is that when I got in the cab and I handed over the money, like I felt like I was just handing over my self-confidence, my self-trust, my self-worth, my self-respect. I just asked myself, like, how did I get here? Like, what happened? And I have so much space between then and now, and I can tell you how I got there. But at the time, like I felt just so defeated. That was one of my I can count on one hand how many rock bottom moments I've had. That was definitely one
Mhm.
of them.
It's amazing though to look to write about it and have the perspective that you have now
Mhm.
of, and I can see this in my life story too, where there's like these peak painful experiences where you're like, how did I get here?
It's just like a moment of clarity you have.
Yes, that,
And I
and it
didn't
is
break up
like
with
a
him right away.
oh my God. You're like, wow.
I think I need a little bit more pain. My tolerance. That's what my therapist said. She's like, you have such a high tolerance for bad behavior.
Oh my God, it's just so true. And thank God, like you said, you have all this space and a lovely family and a healthy relationship.
Mhm.
But any person watching this, listening to this, no matter what you've done, no matter how far, we all have our bottom stories, like Andrea is generously sharing with us, of self-abandonment.
Yep.
And really what you're talking about in the book and what you're teaching is about reclamation of self, of soul, of caring what you think more than you care about making waves. You talk about creating superior stories. Tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about that, would you?
Yeah, in the training that I had, I'm certified in the work of Dr. Brene Brown, I think, which most of your listeners know who she is. One of the many interesting things that we learned around brain science is how when something happens to us, and it can be something sort of, innocuous, like maybe you kind of made a huff or something as you and I are having this conversation. You haven't, but maybe you did. And I might make up a story like, oh, Terry must have not liked what I said. Maybe she didn't like my
Right.
answer. Or maybe I took the conversation and like we jump to conclusions. We make up stories. And what's interesting to me that I found out in my training is that it actually, the pleasure center in our brain is rewarded in those moments because our brains like to close the loop. It likes a conclusion to the story and it does not care if the story is correct or not. It's just
Yep.
like, okay, like
Yep. Now it's done. Good.
and we do this constantly. All of us do this. And so that's what that whole chapter is about, is just noticing when you do it and creating the new neural pathways, because endless science tells us that that's possible. And
Right.
I mean, I've been able to change my own life through that. So yeah, I nerd out on the brain science. It's so interesting.
It's so amazing. It's so funny. I interviewed do you know Dr. Daniel Amen?
Yes, I've heard of them.
I
Mhm.
mean, he's just great. And I've been really getting into his stuff as well around mental health and brain health and the connections. And it is completely fascinating, I will say.
Mhm.
So, moving, I want to keep going on this superior story thing just for a sec. So, in what you're teaching is to, a lot of times we're catastrophizing and or just simply getting it wrong.
Right.
So, is what is your 2 cents about? Is it getting more comfortable in the unknown, or is it finding out? Is it asking the question, or is it both of those things? Like what is your thought about how do we stop? How do we stop the crappy stories?
Mhm.
How do we really build from a psychological point of view? How did you shift this in your own life?
You know what? One of the things that was so helpful to me, Terry, is when this was probably 18 or so years ago, and I was in therapy and had been recently diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and panic disorder. And it was just good old fashioned CBT, and my therapist giving me worksheets and also working with it through me. And how do you do this? And things like, okay, what is worst case scenario? Like write out your fear story, just run with it. Give yourself permission to write out all the ways that you're going to become destitute because your client decided to not renew this month, like those
Yep.
types of things that happen to us. And writing it out and seeing it in black and white was helpful for me to just logically see how much nonsense it really was, or if it was very much a possibility, look at how resilient you are. Like, are you resourceful? Are you able to course correct and do something else to make money? So just slowing down, because those of us who are anxious, and maybe there's some ADHD in there, or diagnosed anxiety, whatever it is, and even if you're just anxious,
Mhm.
it can run away so fast before you even know it. And what has helped me profoundly is to be able to catch it, sort of like someone running out the door and you like catch them by the back of the shirt, like just
Yep.
just with a finger, to be able to reel it back in more quickly. And I still in really difficult moments do my own CBD on myself. Sorry, CBT, not CBD oil. I mean, although that's great too.
Right. She's
Cognitive
talking about
behavioral therapy.
cognitive behavioral techniques of
Yes,
like,
yes. And that's
yeah.
honestly, like, that's where I would tell people to start.
I love it so much. If you guys are just joining us, if you're listening, if you're watching, I am talking to my friend Andrea Owen, and her new book is Make Some Noise, Speak Your Mind, and Own Your Strength. And it just came out.
August
So I want
31st.
to, where can people get it? Tell us that.
Anywhere books are sold. It's, on Audible. I know a lot of people like to listen to it on audiobook, but if you go to andreaowen.com/noise, there's a free accompanying workbook there. I mean, they could get a book plate, personalized signed. I will snail mail it to you. I'm doing a free book club. There's all kinds of free stuff there on that page.
Oh my God, wait. So give us that URL again. Is it just andreaowen.com?
andreaowen.com/noise.
Okay, /noise.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Because having just done a book, you really do want the bonuses because it gives so much value. Like, don't you
Mhm.
want to be in a book club that Andrea is
That
organizing? I
I'm
do. I can't wait. Like,
that I'm running. Yeah. And the workbook, like I ask over 250 questions in this book. Like I am teaching people. I mean, you want to talk about get curious. Like I am leading you to getting curious about your life. And I'm essentially teaching people how to coach themselves. And the workbook, I didn't want people to have to buy a separate workbook. So we made it. It's beautiful. It matches. It's free. Yeah. I would
oh,
grab it.
amazing. I love it. All right. So as the last thing before you go, I love that you opened the book itself with a short poem called Burn It Down. Would you
Mhm.
read it for us as your last?
I will. Will you let me just grab it really quick?
Yeah,
I
I
don't have
sure
it in front
will.
of me. So as I'm pulling this up, I'm going to tell you a quick story about that poem.
Sure.
I I originally wanted the book to be called Burn It Down, but
I
it's
love it.
already sadly, it was already taken. It's a different book, and which I'm sure it's a great book. And this came to me sort of, I mean, I kind of hate to admit it, but it was sort of just a first draft poem that I wrote very quickly. And I'm like, you know what? I think I'm going to put this in the book. So again, it is called Burn It Down. And please hold. Let me get back past the introduction. Here it is. It's really dedicated to anyone who is going to read the book. She had fire in her belly, and she used it to summon her truth. She had fire in her soul, and she used it to remember where she came from. She had fire in her heart, and she used it to trust the women who came before her. She had fire in her spirit, and she used it to show other women their own flames. She had fire in her eyes, and she used it to burn it all down. And she had fire in her every being, and she used it to blaze a new path, a new way, a new life.
Oh, man. I love that so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. You guys listening, watching, go to andreaowen.com /noise. So you get all the goodies with it. Join the book club. There's so many things. Thank you, Andrea, so much for your work in the world. I so appreciate your voice and what you're doing and our friendship. So thank you for spending time with us today. And you guys go do it. Go get this amazing book. I can't wait.
Thank you so much. And you're quoted in my book in the intuition section. So everybody check that out.
Yay. That's so nice. Thanks, pal. All right. To be continued.
Bye.
Bye.